Hey, it's Daryl again. This is just a thought that I had few months ago, and then I thought about it again today, and this is sort of in the realms of the situation of coffee and no breakfast. When I've had my coffee, but I haven't had my breakfast yet, and then I get these great thoughts. So thought I'd share this one with you. I saw somebody comment on something, and I was like, "Oh, I've thought about this before." So I just thought I'd make the video, and then I can post it as a reply, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I'll read and comment as I go. Okay, so the person was talking about how we should have a form of decentralizing energy production and use. The same way as roads are kind of decentralized, like in a lot of countries, the councils control the roads, look after the roads. Like in New Zealand, councils look after the local roads, and the whole country government, the top government, looks after the highways and railways together. So now they've merged highways and railways together. They're managed from the same budget, and that way, if you're driving long distance around the country or transporting goods or yourself, you're using the national scale highways, which are all maintained by one road maintainer, which means that the budget's very large and it's spread over the whole country. If you have an incident in one place, you need to replace a bridge, there's going to be budget to do that. So anyway, I'll talk about the energy. So what about decentralizing energy production for resilience? So I started with large-scale nuclear power is a dumb idea for New Zealand due to scale. Most normal nuclear power plants are about a gigawatt or higher. So if you build a 1 gigawatt base load at one point in the network, you'll have an outflow capacity problem there. Now, clarification, you do have smaller nuclear power generators, but they're generally built in clusters, and you build them in clusters so that one nuclear power plant can power the other nuclear power plant's cooling when that nuclear power plant is offline for maintenance. So typically what happens is countries build nuclear power plants in groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or 8 reactors, and if one reactor's offline for maintenance, then the cooling systems and equipment is run from the power generated in the other nuclear power plants. You can't just turn a nuclear power plant off because you have to run its cooling for weeks or months or maybe even years after the power plant's been turned off, and that means that you have to build them in groups of nuclear power plants. It's just a technicality of how they work. You'll want to put the plant in a major demand area, so you don't have to spend billions of dollars on the power lines that go from the plant, and you have the losses on the power lines from the plant. So you need to build it in Huntley. Huntley is a town in New Zealand. It's about halfway between Hamilton and Auckland. Auckland's our largest city with like about 1.5 million people, and Hamilton's another fairly large city, maybe with, maybe 100,000 people, but also the area around Huntley, there's and the Waikato, there's a lot of other small towns, medium-sized towns really, and so altogether maybe there's a few 100,000 people living in that area, so that's why you'd want to put it there. In New Zealand, the population is distributed. Most of the people live in the north near Auckland, like 80% of the population or 75% of the population live in the North Island, and only I don't know, 15 or 20 or 25% of the people live in the South Island. And so in the North Island, most of the people live halfway up the North Island or further north. That's just a thing of people don't know that about New Zealand. And it's similar to how in Australia, almost everybody in Australia lives on the east coast. So you'll want to put the plant in a major demand area so that you don't have to spend billions on lines to that plant. So you want to put it in Huntley. I feel like I've just read this before. So you will need to put it in Huntley. At that point, if you mess up or have an earthquake, it will be very painful for all New Zealanders, because like we occasionally get earthquakes from out of the blue in places that we don't think normally have earthquakes. That happened in Christchurch about a decade ago. It was one of the largest and worst earthquakes in New Zealand. A lot of, 160 or 165 people died, and the middle of Christchurch City was completely destroyed. They had to effectively pull down every building in the CBD. A lot of houses were damaged too. Okay, so if you have a nuclear power plant and a nuclear power plant is affected by a single earthquake, then you lose a huge portion of New Zealand's electricity at one go. And this is why New Zealand's different. Like, we would only build one nuclear power plant. We wouldn't have 5 or 6 of them spread out over a big geography, such as could be the case in Europe or in the United States. And certainly Japan's got that sort of situation too. Theoretically, you could build 3 or 4 smaller stations, but do you want to be the test subjects for a new technology? And so what I'm referring to here is this thing called modular reactors, which is a new technology to have a reactor design that sort of fits in some shipping containers, and they're smaller and you can move them around. But I'm always thinking, like, you don't always want to be the test subject for a new technology, because what if it doesn't work properly? You put your money into it and you're just wasting your money. So, and also, do you want a small nuclear power reactor in your backyard? I don't. So what's the alternative? I always want to suggest something that you can actually do. So here's the thing that you can actually do. You can put some solar panels on houses and install some batteries in the houses. So when I looked this up a year ago or whatever, the 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant would cost about $9 to $15 billion. And would it go over budget? Who knows? Big projects always go over budget. They seem to. But for the same amount of money, so $9 or $15 billion, that's like 6 to 10 billion US dollars. You can install a 5 kilowatt array of solar panels and a 10 kilowatt hour battery on 500,000 houses for the same price. So that's using the same amount of money just to buy stuff that you can buy right now. Now, interestingly, I've scaled it so that there's a bigger battery and not so much solar panels, because I know people who recently got solar installed and it's around the other way. They seem to have more panels, say 8 or 9 kilowatt hours, no, 8 or 9 kilowatts of panels, and then a battery that's more like 5 kilowatts, so kilowatt hours. So kilowatt hours is the storage capacity. Anyway, so yeah, so on a perfectly sunny day, a 5 kilowatt array could charge a 10 kilowatt hour battery in about 2.5 hours. That's how that works out. Anyway, you can do that for the same price. This would generate 2.5 gigawatts of solar on solar peak and store 5 gigawatt hours for overnight. So that's like way more power. It will make less power in the winter and more in the summer than the nuclear system. About 50% more overall during the whole year. So the solar production would be more. Now, my mathematics is it's a approximate. It's a back of the envelope calculation. What I'm saying is check the maths for yourself. But it can't fail all at one time in a disaster. This is a huge advantage. I'll just spread these systems out over all sorts of houses through the whole country. I wouldn't cluster it all in the rich neighbourhood or anything like that. I'd have a system where effectively the government or some big companies or whatever, they manage these systems, and they specifically don't design it to be all installed in one neighbourhood. It's designed so that the installation gets equally spread out over all the neighbourhoods of the whole country. Now, how many houses are in New Zealand? 2 million houses or something like that. How many systems did I say we wanted to build? We'll just go back. Don't know. Did I have a number there? I don't think I did. Anyway, we'll just keep going on. Okay. But it can't fail all at one time in a disaster. If every fifth house had power, I don't know why these symbols are in here. That's a typo. Okay. Wait. If every fifth house had power in a widespread disaster, it would be better for resilience. You can get a hot shower and charge your phone at your neighbour's house in a disaster, provided they also have a water tank and water pump. Okay. Now, in New Zealand, a lot of people do have water tanks and water pumps. So I have a small emergency water tank, which almost everybody has now, because you can just get these at the local council. This is probably the case everywhere in New Zealand. You get these rainwater storage drums that are the size to fit in the back of an SUV, so you can just buy one when you're in the council paying a bill or something, and you can take it home with you and install it. Not that it's connected to the water supply, but it gives you a drinking water supply in a disaster if the water mains go out. The batteries can also be charged from the mains if it's not sunny in the winter, which can help prevent high spot power prices on peak load at dinner time and also at breakfast time, and it helps balance the grid. Now, this is a problem that they're starting to have in the United States and Europe. So if people had household batteries, it would help decrease the peak power prices at the expensive part of the day when the demand is very high. It's typically in the winter at dinner time and in the mid-afternoon or the late afternoon at dinner time when it's hot and people have their air conditioning on and they're cooking dinner. Also, the solar surplus can be used to charge electric vehicles. If you're going to install solar and batteries on 500,000, I said 500,000 houses. So there's about 2 million houses, a little bit more than 2 million houses. So I'm looking at the 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 houses would have one of these systems installed. You'd also want to implement cellular connected smart chargers for cars. So this is just a thing where if you're going to have this distributed power generating plant, then you would also need to have controls on things. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that you stop people from being able to charge their cars. You just have a thing where, say, there's a lot of demand on the power network. What you do is you charge electric cars at half the speed that they're normally charging, or quarter of the speed. So if you plug it in, it's still going to charge when you leave the car plugged in all night. Because this is, a lot of people don't know this is how you typically use an electric car. You leave it plugged in all night to charge. The ones with big batteries take about 8 hours to charge if you charge them at home. And so typically people are at home asleep for typically around 8 hours every night. So most people with electric cars do, if they're using their car every day for commuting or their business activity, they're typically charging it overnight when the electrical grid doesn't have high demand. So you want to set your charges so that if people plug in their car at dinner time and dinner time's the peak, then it actually delays the charging for a few hours until 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, and then charges from say 11 o'clock at night to 6 a.m. You can use that to balance the grid by charging at the solar peak and disconnecting and decanting the power out of the house batteries into cars at optimal times. So you can do a thing. I don't imply regularly drawing power from cars, except in exceptional circumstances. Most chargers don't support that feature anyway. Disasters and adverse energy trading events, ultra high spot prices. So I saw an adverse event a few weeks ago in Auckland. The price of electricity was, for not very long, half an hour or 2 hours, it was thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars, $60,000 per megawatt hour. Exceptionally exceptionally high prices, 100 times the normal price or something like that. So those sorts of things happen a few times a year, and usually not for very long. Occasionally, adverse trading event can happen under certain weather conditions in New Zealand. If it's super freezing for a week, sometimes the heating demand doesn't match generation, and that makes electricity very expensive for spot users, not for regular household plans. Another good thing about solar and battery option is that you can have a gradual rollout. You don't have to wait 20 years and then have the thing turned on all in one go, at which point you'll collapse the energy market. So the important thing about a solar installation is that it's gradual. You start with the first one, and when they're finished building it, you turn it on, and then you build the subsequent ones in parallel, increasing the number of installs as you go, as the number of workers being trained and doing the installations increases. You'll have a ramp up. I was trying to find the camera. You'll have a ramp up, and then that ramp up will mean that power companies can, over a period of a few years, change how much power they generate or how they do things, how they buy coal or gas or whatever it is that they need to generate the power, or the rate at which they do maintenance on everything, or add new power lines. All of that stuff can be done as the energy balance slowly changes. But if you build a big nuclear power plant and then turn it on, you just have bang, suddenly there's a place where a load of electricity is all flooding out of one location, which disrupts the energy market. That's terrible for markets. If the solar energy thing turns out to be wrong, like say the technology gets replaced by something else, something new and unexpected, you can change the direction after a few years of just having spent 15% of the budget, or half of the budget, or quarter of the budget, or whatever. If you get 10 years into a nuclear power plant problem, and then you stop building the nuclear power plant, all of the money that you spent on building the building and setting it all up and building those new power lines, that's all wasted if you never actually finish the project. So you get those. I think there's nuclear power projects quite often in some countries that they get halfway through building it and they've already used the whole budget and it's only got half a power plant, and then they're like, oh, what do we do now? Do we just keep spending? We pay twice as much to get it finished, or maybe 3 times as much to get it finished, and it still hasn't generated any power for the 10 years they've been working on building it. Anyway, so I just consider it that these simple arguments should be enough to never consider a large-scale nuclear power plant in New Zealand. It's certainly different for other countries. And also, here's another thing. This plan... Whoops, we'll just do this to get it on screen. This plan will not work in countries that don't have some other consistent generation base, like geothermal or hydro. Also, it works in places that are not freezing cold in winter. So in New Zealand, we do get some freezing cold days in winter, but only a few days at a go. And that's typically in the south, where not very many people live, because the south is closer to Antarctica, where the cold air comes from. So in the South Island, you have about 1 million people living in places that can get some freezing days in winter. So we will get sometimes, a couple of times a year, you might get snow that snows to sea level, in which case there's some towns and cities that will have snowfall on their solar panels. And so those solar panels will lose generation. Or else the other one you get is persistent overcast, very grey days, and that can happen. But we don't typically get that for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. We typically get very, very cold grey weather where it's very cloudy. We only get that for a few days at a time, and then the wind will change direction and we'll get sunny days. And I know that there's some places, I think one of my friends, he said that when he went to the Netherlands in winter, he said it wasn't sunny even once in 6 weeks. And so he said that that would be a terrible place to have, well, yeah, he didn't say this, but obviously it would be a terrible place to have solar panels because it would be overcast, and so they won't generate that much power. But New Zealand's a very big, long oceanic country, and we typically have different weather in different cities at different times or at the same time. So it might be really sunny in the north and cloudy in the south, or it might be really sunny in the south and cloudy in the far north, or cloudy in the middle and sunny at either end. And so distributed solar generation actually makes more sense. Anyway, that's my idea. Just thought I'd record it as a video, I'll post it online, and then people can hear those thoughts. Okay, thanks for watching. Give me a like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. There we go. I just sort of throw that in. I don't say that very many times in my YouTube videos recently. Cheers. Have a nice day.